Make myself a little breakfast here. This is car channel content. Oh yeah, that's right. Today we're gonna be building the LS7. We're heading down to Red Barn Racing, bringing the parts I've got here in my garage, and then we're gonna put together a motor today, or an engine. I guess if you say motor, it pisses off the EV folks. Well, while we're on the subject, I guess, since probably no one's gonna realize that was just a little joke. What's that thing called? I forget. That when you put your engine in the car, you gotta connect it. You gotta mount it down. Oh yeah, that's right. The motor mounts. The other thing too, the stuff you put inside. It's real slippery, real viscous. It keeps all. Oh yeah, the motor oil. So unless you put oil in your Teslas, shut up. There they are. There she is. I hate that stripe so much. I've got to take all these parts over to Mike right now. Well, not the Willwood part. There's a lot of stuff involved in a changeover. In fact, that's why I'm very grateful for Holley EFI to actually get involved in this project and send us all of the Holley LS7 changeover parts that we needed. Now it's going to work for any LS changeover, and they have applications for pretty much anything, well, almost anything, to put an LS in your car. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put in the description down below a link to their website. Just have a look around. They've got everything from carburetors to modern fuel injection, which like we're putting in this car right here, because of the reliability, the power, the ease of tuning, and the fact that I'm probably too stupid to figure out carburetor tuning. But regardless, we'll go through all these parts that are needed for the changeover. There'll be quite a few videos on the actual changeover to the LS from the ZZ6 350 that's in there now. And when we get down there, when we're talking with Mike, we'll talk about why Holley, because he actually had Holley in his 68 Camaro, which I believe is being changed over to a big block now from an LS7 also. And we'll talk about why these particular parts, and we'll go over what we needed, which was a lot more than I was anticipating to put an LS into a classic car. But with all that said, I gotta load all this in the truck now. And yes, I know that there's been a huge lack of content on this car. To be honest, it hasn't really moved from that spot ever since I got it running. And that's mostly because the ZZ6 has a bad crank seal and a rear main seal and is pissing oil everywhere. And I can tell you one reason why I wanted to go with Holley EFI, and that's because this car doesn't have catalytic converters on it. Sure, we could put high flow cats on it. There were no cat requirements or EPA catalytic converters on vehicles in 1967. So I'm able to kind of not have to deal with the very stringent emissions control systems that exist on modern cars, like my white one. But one thing I cannot stand is the smell of just regular gasoline that is not being filtered. I can't, it smells like an old truck, an old tractor. I can't do it. But I also don't want to necessarily put cats on it and reduce any of the horsepower. So going with E85 is actually a really good middle ground where the smell is much sweeter, it's much better. And regardless whether you want to argue with me or not, E85 is a lot less polluting, has a lot less pollutants in it than gasoline does. Sure, it's still combustion, there's still carbon, but it's not nearly as much as gasoline. So it's kind of the best of both worlds. E85 in this car will not be worth nearly as much horsepower it is as my white car, because that's a boosted application, and we're not going boost on this car. We're keeping it naturally aspirated and extremely simple. But we'll talk about some of that with Mike too. There's some things you gotta consider when you're building a car that's capable of flex fuel, and you can't just throw it in. There's things you gotta do. But anyway, we're on our way down there, and we'll be at his new shop soon. Oh yeah, I don't know if I mentioned that. Mike's actually he's putting on his big boy pants, and he's got himself a new shop. So that's going to be exciting, because taking from someone who's moved studios twice now, having no space sucks a lot. Here's our block. I had a couple things I wanted to talk to you about on camera real quick though, if you don't mind. When you send this off for machining, and it gets all balanced and stuff. Right. Is that something you have to do if you get, well, I guess if you're going with aftermarket pistons and rods and everything like we are, you need it all assembled and balanced with the machine shop, right? We need it all balanced, and then we should double check all the clearances and things of that nature. And then same with the heads. We sent the heads out to Frankenstein for porting, right? So they were OEM LS7 heads. Yes. But they were sent out for porting, and then obviously the valve guide fixes and all that stuff for the LS7 problems. Valve guides, and then stainless steel one-piece exhaust valves, and then they set up all the valve springs as well. So the heads basically assembled when they came back? Oh yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah, fully assembled, ready to rock and roll. All right, and then our block obviously is what we're going to be assembling today. Our block. Okay. And then the last but not least, everyone's like, why'd you go LS7? I went LS7 because of what his did. And of course he's going with a big ass engine now. And I think For a while there, he was trying to talk me into either LSX iron block so we could go with boost, or even possibly an LT platform.
Yes.
But I didn't go LT because I didn't want direct port because I want to be able to play with some of the tuning. Yeah. At least learn. And that's why the Holley EFI stuff, which I already showed you guys earlier, really plays into all this. So it's essentially going to be an EFI version of his drag car that he had prior to going big block.
Street car.
It's a drag car, don't lie. Okay, it's leaf springs and all that, and still doing like what, 1 360 foots with leaf springs and gas shocks.
Yep. But yeah.
I didn't see them when they were stock, so how much of material do they take off?
Everything you can kind of see if you look down in there.
See the machining marks.
You can see where the factory CNC marks are versus some of the newer CNC marks are.
Right.
So they take off a fair amount, but not everything.
It's more about flow direction, right? And guide. It looks like they point that off a little bit more.
And then they soften up the chambers a little bit. And then the...
so they did in here too?
Yeah, of course. And then they do their patent.
And then you said you had this
like
decked because we're going higher compression?
Higher compression, yes.
12.5 to 1?
Yeah, we should be right at 12.5 to 1 compression with this motor.
I think when I'm local, it'll always be E85 because it's kind of available everywhere. But I think if I ever went on a road trip or something, I needed to put gasoline in there, then I'd have to carry a bunch of like the good additives like Torco and stuff like that, just to make sure I'm getting at least 93 out of it. So one of the reasons why we're not going to be putting boost in this application, although you could, is if we were going to go boost, Mike was like, go with the LSX iron block. I wanted also the weight savings, honestly. I'm trying to get some weight off the nose of that car. I want to make it lighter. But it's the cylinder spring, or the spring, or the sleeves. The cylinder sleeves are so thin on an LS7, you can see. So an iron block isn't sleeved at all, right?
No.
Yeah, so because of the sleeves and how thin they are and potentially prone to cracking is why we won't be putting boost on this motor. And I chose to stick with this to make sure I don't later go, hey, let's pro charge it or let's do something stupid. I just want to keep it simple. Turn a key, it fires up, and it's still going to be a 10-second car. According to him anyway. And his definitely went, what, 9.9 at one point, right?
Yeah, 9.9 at 135.
Yeah. NA.
In bad air, the car went 10.3 all day long at 131 mile an hour.
That's when we were at Las Vegas, right?
That's where we're in Vegas.
Yeah, that really bad DA.
6,000 DA.
Yeah. And then under there is a 632 he's playing with for his car. I always like to see it because it's just so freaking big. I mean, those are the heads. Look at that. So here's the 632. That's 10.3 liters?
10.4 liter.
10.4 liter. Look at that. You really can't get a sense of scale in a video, but yeah. I have big hands too, so.
Yeah, that's a 4.6 bore with a 4 3/4 stroke.
4.6 bore
with a
4 3/4 stroke. And one step away from a diesel motor. Look at the size of the pistons in this thing. And you have to go with like what, 2.5 inch headers?
It has a 2 1/4 primary. That's a step.
2 1/4 primary. That's a step. So it steps up.
Yeah, it steps up down halfway down.
The primaries on his heads are as big as many people's stock exhaust systems in regular everyday cars. I don't think people realize the beauty of the simplicity of the pushrod engine.
It's very simple.
But it's old. It needs 4 cams and actuators and VVET.
Actually, overhead cam predates pushrod.
Does it?
It does.
Well, pushrod's still better. Pistons go up and down in there, connected to the crank. Crank is connected to the cam via a chain. Cam turns, lopes push rods. Rods move rockers, rockers move valves. Easy. I mean, there's really not that many moving parts. Yeah, look at a 3D diagram of the Nissan VVEL head turning. It's like, oh my God. We had debated painting this, but we're just gonna leave it there, we think. I like the silver and black kind of look. I thought about going with the orange, old school block color, but I figure it's a new school motor, so I'll keep it that way. As if you had any respect for me anyway, you're probably gonna lose some with this question I'm gonna ask, but I've always wondered. Obviously, it's lubricated with oil.
Right.
Why doesn't it smoke all the time if there's oil in the sleeve?
That's what the oil ring's for.
Sorry, this is a lot of learning opportunity for me. I've only ever built a 2.3 liter Ford, or 2.5 liter Ford. See, I can't remember what size it was, and that was bad.
So this is a top ring here, and then whenever we pull them out of the package, there's the piston for it.
And they're already labeled as such 1, 2, and 3?
1, 2, and 3. So it makes it pretty simple for the assembly process, but most of the time, if you get some of the other manufacturers or something like that, they're not really labeled that well, and you kind of got to do a little bit of research.
So is one the top?
Which? Well, number one would be the top ring, yes. This is the number 2 ring here, and this is what they call a Napier cut ring. And then it's marked here, M, and then that's the actual top of the ring there. And this is the oil ring that we were just talking about. So this is basically what they call an oil control ring.
Oh, so the oil stays in there.
Yeah, and it doesn't come up. If you get these clearances wrong on this is where you get a lot of your smoking and stuff like that. It'll just literally go right through these things. And it's actually 2 rings, because these are so much thinner than the other rings here.
So where does it pick up the oil then? Inside the block?
Literally splashes up from the crankshaft.
Oh, so it grabs it from the bottom?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, not really, but there you got to imagine that all the bearings and everything like that have oil coming out of them.
Okay.
Because it's constantly putting that pressure through the bearings.
Right, because in the middle of the main bearings is a hole, and that's where the oil comes into the main bearing too, right?
That's where it comes into,
Okay.
and then it goes through the crankshaft and into the rod bearing, and then as it slings it around, it just goes everywhere.
That's why oil sludge is bad, because it gums all that up.
Exactly.
Change your oil at proper intervals, and use the right weight oil, because that tolerances are based on the weight too, right? Don't be like, I got oil leaks, I'm just gonna run 0.50 now.
Full synthetic.
So this video might seem kind of boring, but yeah, there's a lot of things I didn't even realize here. Like, so one of the things he was doing, which you just saw right there, is he's sort of making some adjustments to the rings there, because there's a certain tolerance that it needs to be in terms of the gap, and that's what he's doing there. He's doing some fine tuning on that. These are things that I would love to be able to do myself, but I don't want to screw this up. So that's why you pay someone like Mike to do it, because I just would have been like, oh, rings go in piston go in engine good. So he was saying right there that the rings were actually a little too tight. So that's why he's making some fine-tune adjustments there. You can't really see it, but there it is. There's the gap right there. Sorry about the noise, it is a working shop. There's the gap right there, and that's the gap that he uses caliper, or not caliper, but a gauge tool, to make sure that the gap is correct. So he was saying the rings were a bit too tight. That's the wrong way. So he's adjusting those now. And then when it comes time to put in the cam and stuff like that, I'll probably give a hand at that. But I'm so tempted to take the ZZ6 motor that's in the 67 now and tear it apart, because it doesn't need a rebuild, but it needs a new crank seal and stuff, like I said, crank seal and rear main seal, and tear it apart and rebuild it myself. But then again, I can also just sell it. I don't have anything to put it in. So why spend money on rebuilding it for the next guy? I'm not gonna get that money back. So here's our main bearings right here. It's almost like a Teflon coated type of material. For all of you out there that build race engines and stuff that are like, why aren't you going full lead bearing, blah, blah, blah. This, again, is not a really high horsepower. It's not gonna see a lot of prolonged abuse on track or anything like that. We're just building a street rod, honestly. So this bearing is perfectly fine. But I just want to point out that yes, we're well aware of different bearing types when it comes to motors, and this is gonna be perfectly fine. If you don't think it's fine, don't use it in your motor. Mike's gonna correct me. He says this is a tri-metal leaded bearing.
This is a King Racing bearing. It is a tri-metal, but it also has a Teflon type coating on it to where it's just a little less friction for better wear.
Would you put a bearing like that in a race motor?
Yes. Yeah, I have these in 1200 horsepower motors.
Okay.
Same bearing.
All right, well then they're really good bearings, so use them in your engine.
This is a 4-inch stroke forged crankshaft that is actually forged offshore, and then it's brought over here and then finished here.
Why is it offshore? Is there a different process than not allowed here?
Price.
Oh, price, okay.
Price point. For our power level, this will more than support what we're doing with it.
And that's obviously OEM stroke?
Oh yeah, this is OEM LS7 stroke, 4-inch stroke.
Okay.
And then it has the 58 tooth reluctor wheel and everything else on it.
And that's for the oil pump?
No, this is actually for the crank reluctor wheel, so the computer knows exactly where the motor is.
Oh, okay.
The oil pump and all that stuff will be put up here.
So that's not just like a basic crankshaft position sensor, then it goes off that?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, this is the actual reluctor wheel for the crankshaft position sensor, and this is the Mallory that was used to balance it. and then it was drilled up here for other balancing purposes. And then the
Oh, so they literally just take metal away where they need to balance it.
Yep. And then, literally, if you look, after it's done, before it's done balancing and everything like that, we'll actually weld the reluctor wheel to make sure that it doesn't spin or anything like that later on down the road. For just that's more of a reliability
There's a
thing.
little tack weld just to kind of
Just a
hold
little tack weld, and it's on both sides, just to make sure it doesn't move.
it. Now the caps are marked, right?
Yes, they're marked and then indexed to go a certain way. So everything lines back up again.
So you always start in the middle and work your way out?
Yeah, because this is the thrust bearing here.
Oh, okay. I don't think people realize just how much metal distorts when it's torqued. Because I mean, even those bolts go in a certain order, right? When you tighten them.
Oh yeah. Yeah, everything goes in a certain order on these.
So we decided to go with these 7-cylinder. That's why it's called an LS7. So there's only 7 pistons. One goes in the middle for balance. Oh, that sounds like something Saab or Audi would do.
Yeah. Volkswagen.
So he's already assembled the pistons. Got the top bearing in there, obviously, right? Because you put the piston in and then you flip it around and then you cap it from the bottom.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. And then that's 2 halves to that bearing. So before we even stab the piston into it, we put the upper half into it so we can just set it right down onto the crankshaft.
And you were saying there is an upper and a lower.
There is an upper and a lower bearing. To pay attention to what bearing set you get. It'll change depending on who you go with.
That's the upper, and then that's the lower. Obviously referring to the crank.
It's actual orientation, not the way you have the motor spun at that time.
I would say that should be without, or that should go without saying, but I live on the internet, so I know.
Yep.
You can see too, he's got the rings already in. This is the lower and upper ring, not talking about the oil ring, but because as he went through and gapped the rings, they're gapped to the cylinder that he tested. So those rings are gapped for that cylinder. And although they should all be the same, it's just good practice to keep them in the cylinder you tested them with as you were doing your gapping. And no, I don't mean gapping on the freeway. That's when the build is done. The gapping I'm referring to is the rings. What, you want to lift, bro? Want to have competition?
Lift?
Sure.
We can go for a run.
If you need to run away from a fight, then go ahead.
No, don't run away from fights.
We were too busy talking about each other's cars to notice that Mike got a piston in here successfully after 20 minutes. Now that the camera's on, it probably won't work.
Yeah, this tool is camera shy.
You just have to be a little more forceful with it. Treat it like baby making. Just ram it. Just
Faster fingers.
and stronger.
Yes.
So I just discovered for the first time, I never knew this, that it's offset. I always thought it was just straight up in the middle, but it's not. It's offset. Well, I'll be dipped. Okay, but now that I see it, I realize how stupid I am. Because you clearly have to fit 2 pistons side by side.
It's not a 4-cylinder.
Mike says my engine's a baby engine. It's small, little baby engine. Were you surprised when I said I didn't want to go boost? Or would you kind of thought I would go boost?
I kind of still think you're going to go boost.
I don't think so. I went this route so I didn't go boost. I went out to tear it all apart again to do it right for boost.
It takes one loss.
But this car isn't about speed for me.
Liar.
I swear to God.
Liar.
So, what are the tolerances in there? Like, it's crazy how these cap bolts get so close to the sleeve.
Yep.
Like, you would just think under the RPM this thing spins that there would be some sort of deformation of the metal that would make that hit, but I guess it doesn't, huh?
No.
Huh.
No. You know, like we do have some pretty close tolerances inside of here. It's right there.
That's what I said. It's so close.
Yeah, it's right there.
It's scary. I guess that's what 6-bolt caps or mains are all about too, right?
Yeah.
Keeping all that exactly located where it's at. It shouldn't have any sort of warble or deformation.
No. Yeah, that's why we spent a little extra money on the parts for this.
Are all these bolt heads different per brand, or is that pretty much the way that they all are, like OEM and everything?
No. It all depends on what type of rod you have or anything like that. The factory stuff is a torque to yield. Okay. These are ARP 2000.
So is it possible then that like the OEM bolt is lower profile, so there's a better clearance there?
It does have a smaller head, and then they're not quite as wide because the bolts are smaller there
I see.
for the OEM stuff.
But how close that is it something that would concern you?
No, not at all.
Surprising to me.
Because if the bolt actually comes in contact with that, there's a much larger issue that happened.
Yeah. So there's the short block, fully assembled. I guess that's the nice thing about pushrod motors, right? Because the heads are fully assembled already, so those are pretty much drop on with the head gaskets, right?
Right.
All right, so next he's gonna put the cam in there. It's pretty easy, just throw it in dry.
Real dry.
So that's the...
Yeah, this is the lower timing gear here. And then this one here is actually an adjustable, so you can have it advanced or retarded depending on what you wanted to go for. This one here will be straight up.
Why would you advance or retard it?
For power output, you want to move the power band a little bit. You would advance it if you wanted to move the power band up in the curve, or you retard it if you wanted to low end torque.
It's like the cam phaser, only it's manual.
Exactly.
Oh, okay.
Exactly.
All right, so that's where I'm gonna end today's video. We got the short block assembled. The heads aren't on yet. We're waiting on some parts to come. Engine, or what are they called? The front and rear covers for the cam.
Rear cover.
Head bolts. Yeah, stuff that Mike knows he ordered, but he just moved into a new shop, so who knows where stuff may have ended up. But that's okay, because we actually have a date now to drop the car off over here so we can start doing the actual LS swap. I'm not gonna say what that date is yet, because until the car is here, it doesn't really matter. Anything can happen. Yeah, I learned a lot today, honestly. I know this video might not have been as goofy or what on as normal, but today I came down here because I figured what other opportunity am I gonna have to see a motor of this quality put together, and I learned a lot about rings that I had no idea about. Like I said, any motor I've ever assisted with, the rings just snapped in and in the engine they went. But these were little 75 horsepower, 4-cylinder motors that didn't matter, that much. So anyway, yeah, we'll have to show you guys the beauty that is the Frankenstein heads and stuff on the engine next time. So with that, I'm gonna go ahead and get out of here. Phil, have fun editing this video. Maybe you learned something too, I don't know. With that said, I'll see you guys later. And every single one of these cars in this shop is just getting an oil change.